The sound of hooves thundering past her door was what woke Natalie Kane that morning in April 1878, and she knew before she even opened her eyes that something had gone terribly wrong at the ranch. Her father had built with his own 2 hands before fever took him last winter. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness of her small house on the outskirts of Provo, Utah, pulling on her worn riding skirt and boots with practiced efficiency. At 22 years old, Natalie had inherited 300 acres of cattle land, a modest herd, and debts that kept piling up like snow in the Wasatch Mountains that loomed over the valley. The banker, a weasel of a man named Cornelius Whitmore, had been circling her property like a vulture for months, waiting for her to fail so he could snap up the land for a fraction of what it was worth. When she stepped outside, the first rays of sunlight were just breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her foreman, old Pete Harrison, was riding hard up the path, his face grim beneath his weathered hat. "Miss Kane," he called out, pulling his horse to a stop in a cloud of dust. "We got trouble. Someone cut the fence line up near the north pasture. Looks like we lost about 30 head during the night." Natalie felt her stomach drop, but she kept her face perfectly composed. She had learned long ago that showing weakness, showing fear, showing any emotion at all in front of men only invited them to question her capability. "Get the boys together. We ride out in 15 minutes. Pete nodded and wheeled his horse around. Natalie went back inside, strapped on her father's old gun belt, and tried to calculate how much 30 head of cattle represented in dollars she did not have. The answer made her throat tight, but she swallowed hard and pushed the feeling down deep where no one could see it. By the time the sun had fully cleared the mountains, Natalie and her 3 remaining ranch hands were following the trail of stolen cattle north through the scrubland. The tracks were clear enough, heading toward the rocky country where rustlers could easily hide their stolen goods until the brands could be changed or the cattle driven across the territorial line. They rode for hours through the warming spring day, following the trail as it wound through stands of cottonwood and across streams still running high with snowmelt. Natalie's hands were steady on the reins, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. She had grown up on this land, had learned to ride before she could properly walk, and she knew every canyon and draw for miles around. It was Pete who spotted the rider first, a lone figure sitting his horse on a ridge overlooking the trail. Natalie reined in, one hand dropping to her pistol, but the stranger made no threatening moves. He simply sat there, watching them with an air of casual interest that somehow seemed more dangerous than any overt hostility. "That is Nathan Pierce," Pete said quietly, his voice carrying an odd mixture of respect and wariness. "He is a tracker, sometimes works as a deputy when Sheriff Morton needs extra help. Word is he can follow a trail that is 3 weeks cold and never lose it." Natalie studied the man on the ridge. Even from a distance, she could see he was tall and lean, sitting his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it. He wore a dark hat pulled low and a long coat despite the warming day. Nathan Pierce urged his horse down the slope toward them, moving with an unhurried confidence that made it clear he considered himself in no danger from Natalie's small group. As he drew closer, Natalie could see he was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds over the mountains. His face was sun-bronzed and angular, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years spent outdoors. "Miss Kane," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. His voice was deep and measured, with a slight drawl that suggested he had not always lived in Utah. "I heard you had some trouble this morning. News travels fast. Natalie replied, keeping her voice cool and level. "What business is it of yours?" Sheriff Morton asked me to look into the rustling that has been plaguing the valley. "Your cattle are the 5th herd hit in 2 months." Nathan leaned forward slightly in his saddle, his eyes never leaving her face. "I've been following the gang responsible for about a week now. Tracked them from a ranch over near Spanish Fork. Your cattle just joined a herd of about 80 head they already had moving north." Natalie felt a flash of hope, quickly tamped down. "Can you get them back? Maybe. But I will need your help." Nathan straightened, his gaze moving to Pete and the other hands. "The gang is holed up in a box canyon about 2 hours north of here. There are 5 of them, well armed and not inclined to give up their prize without a fight. I can take them, but it would go easier with a few extra guns." "We are not killers," Natalie said sharply. "We are ranchers." Nathan's expression did not change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. "Then I will try to make sure no killing is necessary, but I will not lie to you, Miss Kane. These men are dangerous. They have already shot one rancher who tried to stop them, left him for dead on the trail. He lived, but just barely." Natalie felt the eyes of her men on her, waiting for her decision. The smart thing would be to let the law handle it, to go back to the ranch and wait for news. But she could not afford to lose those cattle. Without them, she would not be able to make her next payment to the bank, and Whitmore would have every legal right to foreclose on her land. "We ride with you," she said firmly, "but we do this smart, not reckless." Nathan nodded slowly, and for the first time something that might have been approval crossed his face. "Agreed. Follow me and stay quiet. Sound carries in these canyons." They rode north for another 2 hours, the terrain growing increasingly rugged as they climbed into the foothills. Nathan led them through a maze of rocky draws and narrow passes, moving with the sureness of someone who had scouted the route before. Natalie found herself watching him as they rode, noting the way he constantly scanned the landscape, the way his hand never strayed far from his rifle, the quiet competence in every movement. Finally, Nathan held up a hand and they all stopped. He dismounted and gestured for Natalie to do the same, then led her on foot to a cluster of boulders overlooking a narrow canyon. Below, she could see the stolen cattle milling about in a makeshift corral and 5 men lounging around a small fire. "The canyon has only one way in or out," Nathan said quietly, his mouth close to her ear so his voice would not carry. "If we can block the entrance, they are trapped, but they are also cornered, which makes them dangerous. What is your plan?" Natalie asked, acutely aware of his nearness, the warmth of his breath against her cheek. "I go in alone, offer them a chance to surrender. While I have their attention, your men circle around and block the entrance. If shooting starts, you all stay behind cover and do not take any risks. These cattle are not worth dying for." Natalie turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time. Up close, she could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, the lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into too many sunrises, the quiet determination in his expression. "Why would you risk yourself for my cattle?" Nathan was silent for a moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because men like these need to know they cannot just take what does not belong to them, and because—" He paused, then seemed to think better of whatever he had been about to say. "Let us just get your cattle back, Miss Kane." The plan worked almost too well. Nathan rode into the canyon bold as brass, his hands visible and non-threatening, calling out to the rustlers in a calm, reasonable voice. Natalie watched from her position behind the rocks as the 5 men scrambled to their feet, hands going to their weapons but not quite drawing them. Nathan was talking, explaining that they were surrounded, that the smart play was to let the cattle go and ride out while they still could. For a moment, Natalie thought they might actually listen. Then one of the rustlers, a big man with a red beard, laughed and went for his gun. The canyon erupted in gunfire, the sound echoing off the rock walls like thunder. Natalie saw Nathan dive from his horse, rolling behind a boulder as bullets kicked up dust all around him. Pete and the other hands opened fire from the canyon entrance, and the rustlers suddenly found themselves caught in a crossfire. It was over in less than a minute. Two of the rustlers threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Two more made a run for their horses and were quickly surrounded by Pete and the hands. The red-bearded man who had started the shooting lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder and cursing a blue streak. Nathan had shot him, a clean hit that had disarmed him without killing him. Natalie ran down into the canyon, her heart pounding. Nathan was on his feet, his rifle still trained on the surrendered rustlers, but she could see blood seeping through a tear in his left sleeve. "You are hit," she said, surprised by the tightness in her own voice. "Just a graze," Nathan said, not taking his eyes off the prisoners. "I have had worse." They bound the rustlers and started the long drive back toward Provo, pushing the combined herd of cattle ahead of them. The wounded rustler moaned and complained the entire way, but Nathan showed him no sympathy, keeping him tied to his saddle and moving at a steady pace. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple over the mountains. Sheriff Morton was waiting at his office, having been alerted by a rider Pete had sent ahead. He took custody of the prisoners with grim satisfaction, promising Natalie that the recovered cattle would be sorted and returned to their rightful owners by the end of the week. The rustlers would face trial and, most likely, a long stay in the territorial prison. As the chaos of statements and paperwork finally wound down, Natalie found herself standing outside the sheriff's office in the gathering dusk, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Nathan emerged a few minutes later, his wounded arm now wrapped in a clean bandage courtesy of the town doctor. "You should have that looked at properly," Natalie said, gesturing to his arm. "Doc says it will heal fine." Nathan settled his hat on his head, then paused. "You did well today, Miss Kane. Not many people would have had the courage to ride after those rustlers." "I did not have much choice," Natalie replied. "I cannot afford to lose any more cattle." Nathan studied her in the fading light, and Natalie had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through the facade she worked so hard to maintain. "There is always a choice. You chose to fight for what was yours. That takes strength." Something in his words, in the quiet respect in his voice, made Natalie's carefully constructed walls crack just a little. She felt a sudden, fierce urge to tell him everything. About her father's death, about the debts, about the sleepless nights wondering if she was going to lose everything he had worked so hard to build. About how tired she was of being strong all the time, of never being able to show weakness or fear or doubt. But old habits died hard. She pulled herself together, forcing a polite smile. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Pierce. I appreciate what you did today." Nathan looked like he wanted to say something more, but he just nodded. "Anytime, Miss Kane. If you need anything, you know where to find me." Natalie watched him walk away into the gathering darkness, leading his horse toward the livery stable, and felt an unexpected pang of something she could not quite name. She told herself it was just exhaustion, just the emotional toll of the day catching up with her. She climbed into her buckboard and drove home through the spring night, the sound of crickets and distant coyotes filling the air. Sleep did not come easily that night. Natalie lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying the day's events. She kept seeing Nathan's face, the calm competence in his eyes, the way he had risked himself without hesitation. She kept hearing his words, "You chose to fight for what was yours." In the days that followed, Natalie threw herself into ranch work with renewed determination. The recovered cattle were returned, along with a few strays that had wandered off during the rustlers' drive. It was not enough to solve all her problems, but it bought her a little more time. She worked from dawn until well past dark, mending fences, checking on newborn calves, trying to stretch every dollar as far as it would go. It was Pete who told her that Nathan Pierce had left town, hired by a rancher up north to track down a pack of wolves that had been killing livestock. Natalie told herself she did not care, that it made no difference to her where the tracker went or what he did. But she found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering if he was safe, if his arm had healed properly. 3 weeks after the incident with the rustlers, Cornelius Whitmore showed up at her door with another letter from the bank. Natalie read it standing in her doorway, her face carefully blank, while Whitmore watched her with barely concealed satisfaction. The letter demanded full payment of the outstanding debt within 30 days, or the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings. "Of course, Miss Kane," Whitmore said, his voice oily with false sympathy. "There might be another way to resolve this situation. If you were to consider my previous offer of marriage, I would be happy to forgive the debt and take on the burden of managing the ranch. A woman should not have to shoulder such responsibilities alone." Natalie looked up from the letter, meeting Whitmore's eyes with a coldness that made him take an involuntary step back. "I would rather lose everything than marry you, Mr. Whitmore. Good day." She closed the door in his face and stood there in the silence of her small house, the letter crumpling in her white-knuckled grip. For the first time since her father's death, she felt the full weight of her situation crashing down on her. There was no way she could raise the money in 30 days. She had already sold everything of value, had already borrowed against next year's calf crop. The ranch that had been in her family for 20 years was going to be lost, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The tears came hot and sudden, burning behind her eyes, but Natalie forced them back with an iron will. She had not cried when her mother died in childbirth when Natalie was 12. She had not cried when her father followed 6 years later. She would not cry now. Tears were a luxury she could not afford, a weakness she could not show. She rode out to the north pasture that afternoon, needing to be away from the house, away from everything. The land spread out before her in rolling waves of spring grass, dotted with cattle bearing her father's brand. The Wasatch Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with snow. Her father had brought her to this exact spot when she was 8 years old, had pointed to the mountains and told her, "This land will be yours someday, Natalie. Promise me you will fight for it, no matter what." She had promised, and she had kept that promise through everything. But now, standing here with Whitmore's letter in her pocket, she felt the promise slipping through her fingers like water. The sound of approaching hooves made her turn. For a moment, she thought it was Pete coming to check on her, but the rider was too tall, sitting his horse with a particular easy grace that made her heart skip unexpectedly. Nathan Pierce reined in a few yards away, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "I heard Whitmore paid you a visit," he said without preamble. "News still travels fast, I see," Natalie replied, struggling to keep her voice level. Nathan dismounted and walked over to stand beside her, looking out over the pasture. "He is for closing, is he not?" There seemed no point in denying it. "Yes, 30 days. And his marriage proposal," Natalie let out a short, bitter laugh. "I would sooner marry a rattlesnake. At least a snake is honest about what it is." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I did some checking. Whitmore has been buying up distressed properties all over the valley. He loans money at rates people can barely afford, then forecloses when they cannot pay. He has built quite an empire on other people's misfortune." "That does not help me much," Natalie said, hearing the edge of desperation creeping into her voice despite her best efforts to contain it. "Maybe not. But I also learned something interesting. Your father took out that loan to buy breeding stock, is that right?" "Yes." "He wanted to improve the herd, thought better cattle would bring better prices. It would have worked, too, if he had lived long enough to see it through." Nathan turned to face her fully. "The loan documents say the money was for purchasing 50 head of breeding cattle from a ranch in Colorado. But I did some digging. That ranch does not exist, never did." Natalie stared at him, her mind racing. "What are you saying?" "I am saying Whitmore falsified the loan documents. The amount your father actually borrowed was half what Whitmore claims. The rest is fictional, padding to make the debt bigger than it should be. With the real numbers, you could probably pay off the loan right now with your current cattle sales." Hope flared in Natalie's chest, bright and fierce, but she forced herself to be cautious. "Can you prove this?" "I can. I found the original documents in the county records office. The filing dates do not match up with Whitmore's version. A good lawyer could tear his case apart." Nathan paused, then added quietly, "I happen to know a very good lawyer in Salt Lake City. He owes me a favor." Natalie felt something crack inside her, the careful control she had maintained for so long suddenly fracturing. The relief was so intense it was almost painful, and with it came all the fear and grief and exhaustion she had been holding back for months. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, and she turned away quickly, not wanting Nathan to see, but he had already seen. For a moment he stood there, uncertain, then he quietly said, "I am going to check on my horse." He picked up a stone in his hoof on the ride over. He walked away, giving her his back, and Natalie understood what he was doing. He was giving her privacy, giving her space to let the tears fall without the humiliation of being watched. It was such a simple kindness, but it undid her completely. She stood there in the spring sunshine with tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, while Nathan Pierce stood 20 yards away with his back turned, tending to his horse with studious attention. When she finally got herself under control, wiping her eyes with her sleeve and taking deep, steadying breaths, Nathan seemed to sense it. He turned back around, his expression carefully neutral, as if nothing had happened. But his eyes were kind, and Natalie felt something shift in her chest, some wall she had not even known she had built starting to crumble. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough, "for everything." Nathan walked back over to her, stopping close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair at his temples. "You do not have to thank me. But you also do not have to carry everything alone, Miss Kane. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone help." "Natalie," she said impulsively. "Call me Natalie." Something warm flickered in his eyes. "Then you should call me Nathan." They stood there in the sunlight, the spring wind moving through the grass around them, and Natalie felt the beginning of something she had not expected, something she had not even known she wanted. It scared her almost as much as losing the ranch had, but in a completely different way. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You barely know me." Nathan was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Maybe because I know what it is like to lose everything. My family had a ranch in Texas when I was young. Drought killed the cattle, disease killed my parents, and the bank took the land. I was 15 when I found myself alone with nothing but a horse and a saddle. I spent years drifting, picking up work where I could find it, learning to track because it was the one thing I was good at. I swore if I ever had the chance to stop someone else from going through that, I would take it." "I am sorry," Natalie said softly. "I did not know. Most people do not. I do not talk about it much." He met her eyes and she saw old pain there, long healed but not forgotten. But when I saw you fighting so hard to keep your father's land, when I saw you refuse to give up or give in, I saw something worth protecting. Someone worth protecting. Natalie's breath caught in her throat. Nathan. I am not asking for anything, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know. You are not alone in this fight anymore. The lawyer Nathan knew turned out to be a sharp-eyed man named Samuel Brooks, who made the trip from Salt Lake City within 3 days of being contacted. He spent a week going over the documents Nathan had found, comparing them with Whitmore's records, building a case that grew more damning with each passing day. When he finally confronted Whitmore in the presence of Sheriff Morton and Judge Blackwell, the banker's face went from ruddy to pale to green in the space of a single conversation. Faced with the threat of criminal charges for fraud, Whitmore agreed to adjust Natalie's loan to reflect the actual amount borrowed, plus reasonable interest. The new total was less than half what Whitmore had been claiming. With the money from her cattle sales and a small loan from the Cattlemen's Association, which Samuel Brooks helped her secure, Natalie was able to pay it off completely. She walked out of the bank on a bright May morning with the deed to her ranch in her hands and her father's dream secured. Nathan was waiting outside, leaning against the hitching post with his hat pulled low against the sun. When he saw her face, he smiled, and Natalie felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "It is over," she said, hardly believing it. "The ranch is mine, free and clear." "As it should be," Nathan replied, straightening up. "What will you do now?" Natalie looked down at the deed in her hands, then up at the mountains rising beyond the town, then finally at Nathan. "Keep ranching. Build the herd back up. Maybe take some time to actually enjoy the land instead of just fighting to keep it." She paused, suddenly uncertain. "What about you? Will you be moving on?" Nathan's gray eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. "I was thinking about staying in the area for a while. Sheriff Morton offered me a permanent position as deputy. The pay is not much, but it is steady work, and the valley is beautiful in the summer." "It is," Natalie agreed, her voice softer than she intended. "Very beautiful." They walked together down the main street of Provo, their horses trailing behind them on loose reins. People called out congratulations to Natalie as they passed. The whole town had heard about Whitmore's downfall, and most folks were pleased to see the corrupt banker get his due. But Natalie barely heard them. She was too aware of Nathan walking beside her, the occasional brush of his arm against hers, the way he matched his stride to hers without seeming to think about it. When they reached the edge of town where the road split, one path leading to her ranch and the other toward the sheriff's office, they both stopped. Nathan turned to face her, and Natalie saw something in his expression that made her breath catch, a question he seemed to be trying to find the courage to ask. "Natalie," he began, then stopped, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I am usually better with words than this." "Take your time," Natalie said, surprised to find she was smiling too. "Would you allow me to call on you? Properly, I mean. Not as a tracker helping with rustlers or a deputy doing his job, but as a man who would very much like to know you better." Natalie felt warmth bloom in her chest, spreading through her like sunlight. For so long, she had been focused only on survival, on keeping the ranch, on not showing weakness. She had not let herself think about anything else, had not let herself want anything else. But standing here with Nathan looking at her with hope and uncertainty in his eyes, she realized she did want more. She wanted this. "I would like that," she said. "Very much." Nathan's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Tomorrow evening, then. I could bring dinner, if you would not mind the company." "I would not mind at all," Natalie replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. He called on her the next evening and the evening after that, and the one after that. They ate dinner on her small porch and talked as the sun set over the mountains. Nathan told her about his years of drifting, about the places he had seen and the people he had met. Natalie told him about growing up on the ranch, about her father's dreams and her own fears that she would not be strong enough to carry them forward. "You are the strongest person I know," Nathan said one evening as they sat watching the stars come out. "And I have known a lot of strong people." "I did not feel strong when I was crying in that pasture," Natalie said, still embarrassed by the memory. Nathan reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and solid around hers. "Tears do not make you weak, Natalie. You had been carrying that burden alone for months. You were entitled to cry. The fact that you kept going after, that you did not give up, that is what makes you strong." Natalie looked down at their joined hands, then up at Nathan's face, and felt something inside her settle into place, like a puzzle piece she had not known was missing finally finding its home. "Thank you for turning away that day. Thank you for understanding." "Always," Nathan said simply, and Natalie believed him. The spring turned into summer, and Nathan became a fixture at the ranch. He helped with the branding, with mending fences, with all the 100 small tasks that kept a cattle operation running. Pete and the other hands accepted him without question, recognizing in him someone who understood ranch work and was not afraid of hard labor. Natalie found herself watching him as he worked, admiring the easy strength in his movements, the quiet confidence he brought to every task. But it was the quiet moments she treasured most. The evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. The Sunday afternoons spent riding through the mountains, exploring canyons and meadows she had not visited in years. The way Nathan looked at her like she was the most fascinating person he had ever met, like her thoughts and opinions mattered deeply to him. One evening in late June, they were sitting by the creek that ran through her property, watching the water catch the last rays of sunlight. Nathan had been quieter than usual all day, and Natalie finally asked him what was on his mind. He was silent for a long moment, then said, "I am falling in love with you, Natalie. I think I have been since the day I saw you ride after those rustlers, determined to fight for what was yours. I know it has not been long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Natalie's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I did not think I had room in my life for this, did not think I could afford to let anyone in, but you make me want things I thought I had given up on." Nathan turned to face her fully, reaching up to cup her cheek with his hand. "What things?" "A partner. A future that is not just about survival. Someone to share the good days and the bad days with. Someone who sees me, really sees me, and does not expect me to be anything other than what I am." "I do see you," Nathan said softly, "and what I see is extraordinary." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Natalie felt the last of her carefully constructed walls crumble completely. She kissed him back, letting herself feel all the things she had been holding back, all the hope and joy and love that she had not allowed herself to acknowledge. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Marry me," Nathan said, the words half statement, half question. "I know it is fast, and I do not have much to offer except myself and a deputy's salary, but I swear I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret saying yes." Natalie laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They were wed in August, a simple ceremony in the small church in Provo with half the town in attendance. Natalie wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk all these years. Nathan wore a new suit that he had clearly been uncomfortable in, but Natalie thought he had never looked more handsome. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her with such joy and tenderness that Natalie heard several women in the congregation sigh happily. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed an army. Pete and the hands had strung lanterns in the trees, and as the sun set and the lanterns flickered to life, Natalie danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling more content than she had ever thought possible. "I still cannot quite believe this is real," she murmured against Nathan's shoulder as they swayed to the music. "It is real," Nathan assured her, his arms tightening around her, "and it is forever. You are stuck with me now, Natalie Pierce." She pulled back to look up at him, loving the way her new name sounded. "I cannot think of anyone I would rather be stuck with." Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Nathan kept his position as deputy, but he spent his free time working the ranch alongside Natalie. Together, they slowly improved the property, building new fences, expanding the herd, making all the repairs and upgrades that Natalie had not been able to afford on her own. The ranch that had been struggling began to thrive again, and with Nathan's help, Natalie was able to implement many of her father's original plans for the operation. But more than the physical changes to the ranch, Nathan changed Natalie herself. He taught her that it was okay to lean on someone, that asking for help was not the same as admitting defeat. He showed her that she could be strong and vulnerable at the same time, that sharing her fears and doubts with him did not diminish her in any way. And slowly, carefully, Natalie learned to let go of the rigid control she had maintained for so long, learned to trust that Nathan would be there to support her whether she was at her best or her worst. In the spring of 1879, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Nathan on a warm April evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the look of pure joy on his face made her fall in love with him all over again. He pulled her into his arms, holding her gently as if she were made of glass, and she laughed and told him she was not going to break. "I know," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion, "but you are carrying the most precious thing in the world, and I intend to take very good care of both of you." He was true to his word. As Natalie's pregnancy progressed, Nathan took on more and more of the ranch work, insisting that she rest and take care of herself. At first, Natalie chafed at the restrictions, but eventually she accepted that he was right. She spent the summer supervising rather than doing the heavy labor herself, and to her surprise, she found she enjoyed the slower pace. It gave her time to think, to plan, to imagine the future they were building together. Their son was born in December, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and a shock of dark hair. They named him Samuel, after the lawyer who had helped save the ranch, and held him together in the quiet of their bedroom while snow fell softly outside the window. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered, his finger gently stroking the baby's tiny hand. "He is," Natalie agreed, feeling a surge of love so intense it almost hurt. She looked up at Nathan, this man who had saved her in more ways than one, and said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For turning away so I could cry. For teaching me that I do not have to be strong all the time. For loving me." Nathan leaned over and kissed her forehead. "That is the easiest thing I have ever done." The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the valley. Nathan eventually became sheriff when old Morton retired, a position he held with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. Natalie became known throughout the territory as a shrewd businesswoman, respected by other ranchers for her knowledge and fair dealing. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Martha in 1881 and another son named William in 1884. The small house on the ranch was expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Nathan doing much of the work himself in the evenings and on weekends. The sound of children's laughter filled the rooms and the yard, chasing away the loneliness that had once seemed like a permanent resident. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Natalie back to the north pasture, where he had given her his back all those years ago, where she had cried tears of relief and fear and hope. They stood there hand in hand, watching their cattle graze on land that was undeniably theirs, while their children played nearby under Pete's watchful eye. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Natalie asked. "If you had not helped me with the rustlers, if you had not found those documents, if I had been too proud to accept your help." Nathan considered the question seriously, as he always did. "Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on it. What matters is what did happen. We found each other. We built this life together, and I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the scary parts," Natalie asked with a slight smile. "Not even those," Nathan confirmed. "The scary parts made us stronger. They taught us to rely on each other, to trust each other completely. I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here with you." Natalie leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. "I love you, Nathan Pierce, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Nathan replied, his arm coming around her shoulders. "My strong, stubborn, beautiful wife who was too proud to cry in front of any man." "Until you gave me the gift of privacy," Natalie said softly. "That was when I knew you were different. That was when I started to let you in." They stood there as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold. In the distance, the Wasatch Mountains rose eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to their love and their life. Their children's laughter carried on the evening breeze, a promise of the future they were building together. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared overhead, Nathan and Natalie walked back toward the house hand in hand, their children running ahead with the boundless energy of youth. The lights of home glowed warm and welcoming in the gathering dusk, and Natalie felt a sense of peace and contentment that she had once thought impossible. She had fought for her father's land and won. She had faced down her fears and emerged stronger. She had learned that accepting help was not weakness but wisdom, that showing vulnerability to the right person could be the bravest thing you ever did. And she had found love, real and lasting and true, with a man who understood her completely and loved her not despite her strength but because of it. The ranch continued to thrive through the years, eventually being passed down to their children and then to their grandchildren. But long after Nathan and Natalie were gone, people in Provo still told the story of the proud rancher's daughter who refused to give up her land, and the cowboy tracker who helped her save it. They told how he had given her his back so she could cry in peace, a simple act of kindness that had changed both their lives forever. Some stories, the old-timers would say, were not just about the land or the cattle or the struggles of frontier life. Some stories were about two people finding each other at exactly the right moment, about love that grew from respect and understanding, about building a life together that was stronger than anything either could have built alone. The story of Nathan and Natalie Pierce was one of those stories, and it lived on in the valley long after they were gone, a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to let someone help you, and that turning away at the right moment can be the most profound act of love. In the end, Natalie never regretted those tears she shed in the north pasture, or the man who respected her enough to give her privacy in that vulnerable moment. Those tears had washed away the last of her isolation, opening the door to a love and partnership that sustained her through all the years that followed. And Nathan never regretted staying in Provo, giving up his drifting ways for a life rooted in one place with one woman. He had found his home, not just in the land but in Natalie's heart, and that was worth more than all the wandering in the world. They lived long lives, Nathan and Natalie, surrounded by children and grandchildren, watching their ranch grow and prosper, watching the valley change and develop around them. They faced droughts and hard winters, good years and bad years, always together, always supporting each other. And when they finally passed, within months of each other in their late 70s, they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the shadow of the Wasatch Mountains they had both loved so well. Their children and grandchildren stood at their graves and remembered them not just as ranchers or pioneers, but as two people who had loved each other deeply and completely, who had shown by example what it meant to be true partners in every sense of the word. And if, on quiet evenings when the wind blew down from the mountains, people swore they could see two figures standing hand in hand in the north pasture, watching over the land they had fought so hard to keep, well, no one in Provo thought that was strange at all. Some loves, after all, were strong enough to outlast even death itself.